In the year of our Lord 2022, Discord has become the dominant location of play for all of us dice-worshipping heathens, and with that comes a whole world of tools to visualize our games. Yes, the virtual tabletop, a powerful tool that allows us a great many methods of rolling dice, moving minis around, and doing all the things that you would expect to do in a world before our social interactions were replaced with computers. In the last few years, a great many of these little doodads have popped up, and I thought that maybe I'd talk about my experiences as a freshly minted game master, learning to provide a fun experience for my players. This isn't a review or comprehensive look at VTTs as a whole, so much as it is a crash course on what I went through on my way to producing something workable. If you're like me and find that your hurdles are in the visual realm rather than the narratives of your games, I hope this helps you bypass some of the frustration. Tabletop Simulator is an amazing feat of coding, a wonderful community-driven tool that I've used religiously nearly since its release for various ends. Largely I focused on making use of it for wargaming, which it handles masterfully. The creation and saving of armies is as simple as finding the models you would like to use and cloning it. Rulebooks can be imported from PDF files as physical items, and mapmaking is typically a cinch given that you have access to the model. Unfortunately, Tabletop Simulator runs into some very hard limitations when you ask it to do much more than its namesake job. Things like running a board game or a war game can be easy, even basic map making for RPGs works. But ultimately, Berserk fails to leverage a lot of the tools that a virtual tabletop can provide when playing a tabletop role-playing game. Specifically, features like terrain manipulation, lighting, weather, and other little touches that serve to make a virtual tabletop game that much more visually engaging are missing. Terrain manipulation is all but non-existent outside of a clever workaround that involves cutting PNG files into discrete pieces and creating what the game refers to as custom tiles with those chopped up pieces to create a layer cake effect where hills are represented more or less by stacking flat, ever-shrinking discs atop one another. Aside from that, pre-made meshes in the shapes of hills can be stacked together, locked, and made to amalgamate into a mountain or other terrain feature. Rivers and roads may as well be left as flat drawings though, and lighting effects are not included in the base game as I understand and require mods, often depreciated mods, for the GMs to make use of them. The same follows with weather effects and even simple transitioning of maps. To follow is a list of 3D VTTs meant to replace Tabletop Simulator, in order of how cool I think they are, and judged in comparison using Tabletop Simulator with one world to run my game. This is not necessarily in order of how likely they are to be successful though. RPG Stories is an interesting little beast. Funded in 8 hours, RPG Stories is a Kickstarter campaign that at the time of writing is ongoing. This game promises a lot, and to be completely honest, I'm including it only out of a sense of delusion that it could be as good as it sounds. Before I get too far ahead of myself, let's talk shop. RPG Stories is very similar to most of these other tools, in that the world builders all have more in common with game development software than an actual tabletop, with the unique goodness of this tool being procedural interiors and exteriors. Those of you familiar with Dungeon Fantasy and its procedural tools will love this, because it works in an incredibly similar way. Define the type of wall you would like, define the type of flooring, define the room, and hey presto, you've got a brush that will draw the basic gist of a room for you. In conjunction with the procedural terrain tools, RPG Stories should be far and away the fastest map making tool available to us. Brave Alice, the team behind this tool, seems particularly interested in avenues of monetization that the community can make use of by providing a third-party marketplace that will host community-made content ranging from assets and maps to full campaigns. You can sell your content or you can give it away for free, but if you do choose to sell it, Brave Alice gets a cut. It's a good option, but potentially limiting as to the type of content that will be available to us. Finally, it does come with 3 distinct versions, one for players, one for GMs with world building tools, and an add-on that GMs can buy that will allow other players to play in the campaign without purchasing a full version of the game. A neat little inclusion considering that not every person is going to need the full tools. All that said, it's not playable right now, and probably won't be for another year or so. We likely won't even see the majority of those features for another 2 years. So as cool as that all sounds, let's just remember that there is a very significant chance that exactly none of these things ever come to fruition. Wild Shape is one that I've included because the developer still claims to be working on the project, but at the time of writing hasn't had a public update in just under a year. It has some interesting features like workshop support for maps, terrain sculpting, and some automated placement tools. Just like RPG stories, it also provides some very minimal procedural room building tools. Overall, it's a strong contender between the two, but I wouldn't really put my eggs in either basket. I would say give these two some more time to bake before seriously considering dropping cash on them for your home game, even considering that Wild Shape comes in a free flavor for players. One other problem that I can foresee with this game is the lack of ability to add custom objects. There seems to be plenty of options available to GMs, especially if you have access to the beta branch, but you do have to rely on the developer to add new set dressing. Hopefully this changes in the near future and we're allowed to bring our own custom assets into the game. The Game Master engine is very different from the last two that we just spoke about. For the most part, the Game Master engine is more interested in replicating a tabletop feeling, meaning that it lacks terrain, sculpting, and procedural tools that give us the ability to make highly detailed dioramas that we might see in the other two games. This isn't inherently a bad thing, but it does mean that you're very likely to be spending a lot more time amalgamating smaller objects into representation of larger terrain features. It does have simple map sharing, but again lacks the ability to import custom assets, which is a strong disadvantage in my opinion. If you'll allow me to put on my pirate hat for a moment, there's just a plethora of prefabricated objects that exist to do nothing other than being set dressing for games. Asset from your favorite games can be ripped out wholesale and put into Tabletop Simulator with minimal effort, and this is huge. As a GM, this means that any item, building, or person that we see and want to include in our game can be found and added with just a little bit of work. All that said, it's not the nail in the coffin. You can still import Hero Forge minis, and it has a free version for players, so if you like the art style and don't like terrain sculpting and are okay with a semi-limited pool of assets, then this tool is probably going to do great for you, in spite of the massive fucking price tag of $50. Realm Engine is a little bit lacking compared to everything else so far. It offers sculpting tools, but more importantly, it has procedural terrain generation and full workshop support, just like TTS. I don't really want to spend too long talking about it, because this one doesn't really offer anything special compared to what we've already talked about, with the additional unfortunate caveat that it currently doesn't have the ability to host games. Maybe I'll come back to it soon when it can host games, as it does have important features like having two distinct versions, but at this point in time, however, the Realm Engine is not a serious option for running games. I'm gonna be honest, despite its level on the list, the RPG engine is the one that I'm most likely to drop my cold hard cash on for more than a few reasons. At the top of the list for me is a combination of the fact that the engine has provided a method of importing just about any asset pack that you can get your hands on, and full workshop support that isn't limited to just map sharing. I won't harp on it again because we just talked about it, but this is very useful. It also has its own in-engine MIDI creator to go along with that, which is also a pretty great cost-saving measure. A 3D model from Hero Forge is like $7, and a $15 subscription only gets you like 5 models per month. So having the option to create models in-engine is a good option for those of us unwilling to drop that much cash. Now, despite the lack of procedural terrain and interiors, RPG Engine does provide us methods for sculpting and animation of the terrain. Aside from that, it's definitely the most playable of anything that we've talked about so far. Being in early access, it can only provide so much, but compared to games that aren't even available for purchase yet, the RPG Engine has an obvious, if unfair, advantage. As of the time of writing, the player version of the RPG Engine is free, though that doesn't seem to be guaranteed for long. Tailspire is another Kickstarter project that has transitioned over to Steam. It uses a very similar system to the Game Master engine, where terrain is separated into layers and tiles. The real issue with it, though, is that the vast majority of the promised features are still in development, and after 2 years of work, it starts to look a little worrying. Other than that, the complete version of Tailspire should have features that would rival the RPG Engine, including a mini creator, if you're willing to overlook the lack of terrain animation features. Unfortunately, however, it does only have the one version, and it's $25. So if that matters to you, be aware that you are paying a little bit more for a little bit less compared to other games listed so far, and if you feel unbothered by the idea of waiting for features, then Tailspire is probably a great choice for you in terms of functionality. So, Tabletop Playground sits in a really funny position where most people agree that it's very much so better than Tabletop Simulator, but it's not so much better that you should spend another $20 on it. There really isn't much to say about TTP because everything I said about Tabletop Simulator applies here. If you really liked the methods that were available in TTS, then you'll be glad to know that everything works exactly the same way, down to a tool that can directly import objects from mods on the TTS workshop. So that's probably not a comprehensive list of 3D VTTs, but it is all the virtual tabletops that I could find on Steam. Off the bat, you'll notice that the list is frankly short, and gets even shorter when you realize that 2 of them aren't ready for real play yet, a third is just barely there, and one of them is just the same game that we started with. That leaves us with the RPG Engine, Wildshape, Tabletop Playground, and the Game Master engines as our only remaining options, and if I had to pick one, like I said, I would probably go with the RPG Engine, purely for the fact that I can't in good conscience recommend a game that is early access while not receiving any content updates. Wildshape. You'll also notice that I haven't talked about game aids like character sheets, grids, or dice rollers. This is for a couple reasons, namely, I don't often play RPGs that get that kind of support, and those of us that play any RPGs outside of 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons have probably experienced the pain of seeking system-specific game aids. The second reason is that, for the most part, there will always be better game aids online. As before, anyone who plays anything other than 5th edition probably already has a preferred dice roller, a character sheet creator, and more.